I'm Leslie McIntosh, and I'm going to be the moderator for this. I am a professor at Washington University, and I also have founded and oversee the St. Louis Machine Learning and Data Science Meetup, which is free to attend if anyone's interested. But we're going to have each of the panelists here introduce themselves. And before I forget, this is also sponsored by 1904 Labs. And we had a slide, but everybody should have in their possession one of these big and fast data maturity models that we're going to go over during this session. So, Andrew?
Sure, excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Montgomery. I lead the Information Assets and Data team at Monsanto. So think about that for a second. It's really our data practice for everything from strategy around our data, the build of our data ecosystem, as well as sort of the operational run. Sort of really the thing to take away from us, what we do maybe a little bit differently, is that we think about data as a product, and we sort of encapsulate those data products as a platform in terms of our overall delivery of IT solutions for Monsanto. Yeah, thank you. So when we sit down and think about where we're at, where we're going, and what we're really trying to do if we think about data as a product, we've been through many of these elements across functions and as the enterprise as a whole. I would say today, we're really trying to land and bridge from 4 into 5. Where we're really thinking about how do we take all those silos of information and really unify them behind a single sort of canonical representation and really expose it out for broader data science usage, digital products, as well as sort of just basic insights to help run our company better. And so that's really where we see ourselves in that 4 camp, really bridging and driving and pushing our company into level 5.
And then Laura?
For us, we're actually in the middle of a pretty large, very public acquisition being acquired by Bayer. And while I can't go into those specific details, I would say just a couple sort of high-level things that we think about as we're thinking about data and that activity. And really, I look about where we've been. So in the last year and plus, we've been going through a pretty large transformation about how we expose information for our internal consumption as well as to support our digital products externally to Monsanto. And so that's forced us to think about how we steward our data differently, putting teams, not just people who wear that role as a secondary hat, but put teams together that really focus governing and cleansing and bringing the right business rules together as we build that canonical model of our information. And then really the engineering teams have been building these data sets that are spanning across functions and across businesses. That work alone is making the conversations we're trying to have around our integration much easier, because we've already gone through a lot of the thrashing, if you will, around what it means to be a customer, what it means around your material data. Things that we would need to do from a master data management perspective. There are already things we've already been focusing on. So it's making that conversation easier and helping us hopefully be more successful.
Thank you.
For us, being in an industry like ag, you wouldn't think there's a lot of fast data going on, but the reality is the components that require you to sort of take something like a corn seed and plant it and get it to where it needs to be in a cycled time is extremely a challenging problem. So elements of streaming data that we leverage to do that starts with literally just knowing where we drop the seed into the field, knowing then when it gets harvested, and streaming those events. And every time you touch the seed all the way to the point where it gets processed is an event we're listening for. So we can do things like monitoring truck traffic. We can tell our facilities when a truck's going to arrive. They can start preparing the people so that the time that they need to process that seed as it's coming out of that truck can be minimized, and we can maximize the time we do for processing. We can maximize decisions around which seed we should move into which bags to move to eventually which customers. Operationally, that requires that level of feed. If we waited and did things historically in batch, we could be sitting and waiting for hours to process that. And you can imagine the trucks that would just back up at these facilities. In research, we have different problems, but they're similar problems, right? Using really sophisticated harvesters, we don't have, tens of thousands of harvesters all around the United States in this geography, let alone the other geographies. So we have to really optimize the proper usage and placement of those. So we use streaming data around where the harvesters are, what challenges they're facing in the field, streaming that back in such a way that we can analyze the proper placement and movement of those harvesters across, literally from the top of the United States geographically down as appropriate within the right, what we call RM bands or regions of growing places, so that we can optimize the right usage of those harvesters, our entire research organization. So we're honestly, when we think about data, we try to really think of batch second. Batch is a mechanism to stage data for, say, for learning of our analytical models. And really think of everything we're doing as streaming, using streaming almost as a mechanism for ETL now, rather than using batch. Everything runs at, everybody knows, like at their 8 o'clock job, their 9 o'clock job, their 4 a.m. job, and you hope that those jobs are all done by 7 a.m. So when someone comes in and turns on something, that they get their data, right? We're using streaming as much through those processes as possible, so that we know that as soon as an event occurs that data didn't make it, we can respond right there in flight, rather than waiting until the batch gets done to manage it. You're absolutely right. Talent is a challenge in this space, and honestly, it's a challenge not only because of the type of work, working with data. That's not necessarily something that everyone sort of wakes up and realizes they want to do one day. It's also that even with data, right, the technologies around the data stack is fundamentally changing. In fact, they look more like a software stack in a lot of ways than they look like a traditional data stack, which adds complexity. So if you take someone who says, I'm a data guy or gal, and ask them what they do, they may describe that I manage relational databases, or I help create data visualizations in some BI platform. The reality is those are skills we still need, but those only make up about 15 to 25% of the skills we are looking for in a new candidate. And so, yeah, we have to look at different avenues. We need to interview differently. We need to interview people, like give them tech tests that look more like how to build a back-end software solution than necessarily a data solution. Because we realize when you're trying to create services on top of every piece of information you have to have those skills. You have to think about data not just in the massive sense of everything that's in this system, but think about the data in flight and the data in its usage as well. And so those require a different frame of reference. So we look at different pipelines of talent, different partnerships within the community. We tackle schools differently. We don't just look for people that are maybe MIS. We look for as much CS and everything else, and any other sort of channel. We look at groups like launch code and so forth that are helping embed modern tech stack skills into resources as a leapfrog into other avenues as well. So it's a challenge, and honestly one I think we as a community are doing pretty well in St. Louis. I see us continuing driving innovation through the startup groups, through different knowledge groups that are forming, and I look forward to more and more dialogue around how we continue to elevate that skill across the board. Question was specifically to you, Jeff, but I do have a point of view that I thought would be good to share with the group today. In our data strategy, we've broken our data elements into 5 key areas, and in one of those 5 we call Company 360, and it's sort of ask yourself why. Company 360 is predominantly made up of transactional data, maybe data out of your ERP, could be data specifically your master data. The reason why we give that asset as much focus as we give some of the other ones that are certainly more connected to our business sort of way of operating and our science is that as we've discovered in our drive to push more and more the barrier on analytics, is the notion that we have to be able to connect the elements of those analytics to the understanding of our financials, or the understanding of our people data, or the understanding of our some of the core transactional things that are happening even within our supply chain, and that you can't really understand and equate the value proposition or where you need to make nuanced changes in the model without having that data there. So while we're not innovating necessarily in how we store that core transactional element, we're exposing it in a way that's fundamentally different than really anything that we've ever done as a company before, because of that linkage and opportunity it has within analytics.